I'm Eric Barnes of the Daily Memphian, and welcome to this edition of the Extra Podcast. Today, we're continuing to talk about the economic impact of the COVID-19 pandemic and shutdown, and I'm pleased to be joined this week by Tommy Pacello, who is president of the Memphis Medical District Collaborative. Tommy, how are you?
Good, Eric. How are you?
Good. For those who are not familiar, why don't you do your quick or not so quick spiel on what the Medical District Collaborative is and encompasses?
Sure thing. So we're a community development organization that was founded in 2016, really focused on strengthening the communities and the spaces that are between and around the major anchor institutions that are in the Memphis Medical District. So the area that largely sits between sort of the Danny Thomas on the western side, Cleveland on the eastern side, then it goes to Crump sort of on the southern side, and North Parkway on the northern side, that area of the city. It also incorporates the area around St. Jude campus, so it kind of picks up the area around the Pinch as well. And what I think, the reason that we were started, sort of our very quick genesis story, is that the leaders of these major institutions, when they started to look at what was happening in downtown Memphis, they started to look at what was happening in midtown Memphis with the concourse coming online, with the neighborhoods kind of beginning to click on all cylinders in Midtown. And they started to really say, okay, this area, this 2.5 square mile area where we've got 30,000 employees and students every day coming into work it's beginning to be a donut hole between the vibrancy and the thriving nature of the neighborhoods in Midtown and then also downtown. So there's a very focused effort to build back in the medical district. And just to understand a little bit of perspective, in 1970 in the medical district, there were about 30,000 residents that lived there. And today there's about 10,000. So huge out-migration from the medical district, which is the same thing that happened all over the core of the city, right? We saw that everywhere. But, and there's a very logical thing that happens as the population moves out of the neighborhood serving businesses tend to close. There begins to be, you start to see a decline in the housing stock when that many people leave. Institutions end up controlling a lot of that property, almost in a way where they want to control it to make sure that the right thing happens there down the road. And so now what we found is that there's a lot of vacant land in the district, and a lot of it's institutionally controlled, increasing number of students, employees, a huge amount of, we have two economic engines in the city, right? We have FedEx and we have our biotech logistics center. And frankly, our biotech and logistics center is sort of like with 30,000 employees right in the medical district is one of the, it's sort of our own little Amazon, HQ2 in a way. So, the focused effort was, how can we leverage what these institutions are doing to begin to build back in a community and a place here, to begin to leverage the value of the anchor institutions in such a way that it both accomplishes community wealth building within the neighborhoods, redevelops buildings and surface parking lots, makes the place more beautiful and attractive, supports the small businesses, and then also from an operations point of view, looks for opportunities for collaboration across the institutions on various operations fronts.
So, and you've been nice enough to come do maybe a couple of the business seminars we've done. You've been on Behind the Headlines. And generally when we've talked about all this great new stuff that's happening, right? So whether it was Wonder Bread being, not torn down, but turned into this kind of mixed use apartments and offices. And then there's restaurants, a couple of restaurants going in that medical district, the bike lanes, the sort of beautification. How big a hit, and there are plans for more residential. That's the thing you've really emphasized, that there are 20 to 30,000 people working in the medical district, and this only tiny percentage of people actually living in that
about 3% of the employee population lives in the district.
So how big a hit do you think this will be for that redevelopment and all that positive work that was happening?
So I think we're all still trying to figure that out to a large extent. I don't know that we really know what this finally will look like. But we have some early indicators, I think, that we could maybe share about. The first, when when all this first began to come down and we could really feel the gravity of how serious this was going to be. I actually remember March 2nd, was sitting in with a lot of the anchor leadership, and before really we had gotten serious, I think at that we hadn't really gotten serious about, shelter in place or anything like that, but you could feel it in the room of all the anchor leaders that this is something that's going to be very heavy. It was a very interesting time to be around them, and they were bracing for something really bad. And that's the first time that I personally was like, okay, we're going to deal with something serious here. The first thing that we started thinking about were the small businesses and the impact that was going to have. Most of the small businesses have a week, 2 weeks worth of cash reserves. And yeah, they can shut down for a weekend for a deep cleaning at a restaurant or something like that. But for multiple months, how do you deal with that?
Yeah.
And then so, that's really where our first focus was on the small businesses. And what we did with the small businesses, and tell me if this is too much in the weeds or anything, and I'll stop it. We started to look at, which small businesses are the most impacted, and clearly the ones that don't own their real estate are going to be the most impacted right away. So we launched, similar to some other groups in town, an emergency fund. We had about $150,000 that we allocated to just emergency relief. How do we help with fixed cost? Those kinds
Where did that money, just to interrupt you for a second, where did that money come from? Did it come from the anchor institutions, or was that in your cash reserves of the independent organization?
So we actually retooled. So what we actually had our staff look at our budget, and we retooled our budget, and we had a very quick board meeting to reallocate our budget plan for 2020 to say, hey, we need to address the small business thing head on, and the resident issue, and all the other groups that are going to be negatively impacted by this. And let's see what we can do, because between 2016 and today, we had helped 38 businesses open in the district. And that's 4 years of work. And to see that see that be for naught, it didn't make any sense.
And for people who aren't as, again, maybe don't go down there. I mean, I happen to go, and run into you often when in normal times, getting coffee down there, getting lunch on there. The range of those businesses is actually kind of remarkable. I mean, there's a coffee shop, there's restaurants, but there are others. Name some of the ones, whether by you name the companies or just the type of business.
Sure. And so it's tricky to start to name the individual businesses, but I mean, there's breweries, restaurants, coffee shops, like you said. There's beginning to be some little retail stores. There's music stores, record shops. There are vintage clothing stores that are popping up. Small kind of, it's the like hotels and things like that, little bed and breakfasts that are popping up and opening.
Yeah.
But it runs the spectrum. And I mean, I think that's really been our focus, has been on the neighborhood serving businesses more so than it has been particularly trying to get a biotech company in or something like that. We're trying to build a place and a place that people love, and as opposed to being purely around economic development. And so from the small businesses that they're being impacted, right? It's emergency fund, and then we had the SBA programs that were coming in that sort of served that middle tranche. And then we began to look at remobilization. So we looked at it in 3 phases. So the emergency fund, how do we get you through this initial shock and get you cash for your fixed cost? In that case, I think we distributed $145,000 to 23 businesses. 80% of those businesses were minority and women-owned businesses. And then we were also standing by with concierge service to help connect people in with PPP or the EDIL loans or anything else, the SBA or other loan products within the city. And then we stood up in partnership with Pathway Lending, a remobilization fund, because it takes about, basically a small business, what we're hearing is they're needing about $20,000 to put in inventory, get employees back, point of sale fees, all those kinds of things that need to get to reopen. It's going to cost them about $20,000. And so we did a combination micro loan grant product for that. And that's a rolling product that's out now. So all in, I mean, that was about a $450,000-$500,000 play towards small businesses in the district.
Wow.
That we were able, of resources we've been able to direct that way.
Yeah. Okay. And so the other thing that's interesting, one thing that's interesting, and it should make you happy, whenever I do, if I have coffee or a business lunch or something like that, somewhere in that area, about 50% of the people, I'll send it to them. They say, "Oh, I've never heard of that, but it sounds great. I'd like to see new areas." And they get into that area, down from the Wonder Bread factory or Wonder Bread,
Edge Alley or
Edge Alley, any of that stuff, and they inevitably walk in and kind of look around with this kind of, I had no idea this was here. This is really great. I'm going to come back. Are they open on the weekend? And it is this funny little oasis that's been built of not just those big institutions. And often in the media, we get so hung up on, and it's a big deal when a big employer comes in downtown or a big employer comes in Midtown, but we sort of miss sometimes that the patchwork of putting together, as you said, helping 36 businesses open from very small to mid-size. And that it's a whole different economic impact. So I'm just repeating what you said, but it is for people when, again, as we get back to normal times, hopefully, it is a great place to visit and explore because it's so different and interesting.
Well, and you're right. It's different and interesting. And the way we talk about that is that it's that fine grain aspect of community and economic development. And that's what adds the texture into a neighborhood. That's what makes a place, where people want to come back to. So that's where we spend a lot of our time focusing. And some of it is in the business front, some of it's in the open space and public space front, some of it's in the real estate development front, some of it's in, messaging and events and programming and doing unexpected things so that there's some whimsical aspects to the district. Because the people that work in the district, especially right now, the medical district it's been the front line of our community's COVID response, right? There's the amount of work that the employees and staff are putting in at the institutions. It's a stressful time to be working there. So what can we do to also just make it a little bit, nicer and a little bit more comfortable for the employees, staff, and the visitors that are in the district?
Yeah. Let me take a second just to remind everyone that this podcast is brought to you by FedEx. Possibilities, what we deliver by delivering. The Extra Podcast is one of many weekly podcasts we do at the Daily Memphian. Normally, we're focused on arts and culture and that sort of broadly defined subject on the Extra Podcast. But during COVID, of course, we wanted to kind of broaden out to some other topics. But we also have a podcast of Behind the Headlines, as well as shows on politics that Bill does, a food show that Jennifer does, Jennifer Biggs. We will get back to sports podcasts, we think, eventually. All of our podcasts are on the Daily Memphian site. They're on iTunes, Spotify, Google Play, or wherever you get your podcast. I wanted to talk about some of that outdoor space and it's not just bike lanes. It's just the way the whole sort of redesign of the landscape throughout the medical district, which is something you've been involved in before, forever. It seems like that you and I have talked about these things before you were involved with the medical district. I'm curious how, and I was saying this to Jennifer Oswalt from the Downtown Memphis Commission, maybe last week or the week before, that one of the huge appeals of the coming back of downtown Memphis and of the medical district and these kind of little knit together kind of interesting areas that we're talking about is density. It's about not big sprawling areas with huge parking lots. It's about being close together. It's about bike paths. It's about all of that density. And how does that reconcile with, the short-term COVID pandemic, but, a sense of, well, could this happen again?
Yeah.
Articulate that, what I'm fumbling to get at.
The thing that I think is really interesting is that Memphis is one of the least dense large cities in the country. We have half the population density of Detroit, right? And you look at places that if you look at Seoul, Korea, you look at some of the cities that are in some of the cities that are in Europe and other places where they're much higher density than we have in Memphis that had much less of an impact on COVID, or COVID had much less impact on them. So yes, density, I don't think it's about density. I think it's about the proximity to people and how people are being smart about dealing with this pandemic. Are they wearing masks? Are we being, clean? Are we keeping physical distance from each other? Because frankly, we've already learned the lesson about density. Everything in a city that we do is infinitely easier the closer people are together. And whether it's transit, whether it's economic development, whether it's real estate. And I don't think that ultimately that's going to change. I mean, I think that, especially in a city like Memphis, that's never been highly dense anyway. It's always been, compared to every other city in the country, right?
Yeah.
It's always been a low to moderate density city. Even in our most dense places, it's relatively low density. So I don't, yeah, I mean, it'll be interesting to see how like the psychology of that plays out.
Well, yeah.
And, but and how much of the narrative that Memphians are hearing from other cities that are maybe more dense, and they're trying to apply it in a situation that maybe doesn't really apply like Memphis. But I mean, Memphis is not a terribly dense city, and
no, I think
probably partially part of why I think maybe we potentially could be why we haven't had numbers that other places have.
Right. Well, and I think you do. I think you're right to talk about the psychology of it, because there is so much that is unknown about COVID, obviously, and so much real concern and fear and all that. So I think the psychology of it is important. I think also, and I've heard, epidemiologists and experts talk about how early on they talked about, stay indoors, and that was a mistake. Like actually being outdoors, we should be both just for health, for physical health, mental health. And you're safer when you're outdoors. And that's one of the things about, again, people who haven't really spent time in the medical district and everything that's changed there is all the outdoor connections and the connectedness between places. And it's a more, it's not a pastoral scene, but it's a really interesting scene, because you go from these cool renovated buildings to the very long-term auto body shops. I think that y'all get huge credit for not driving out the existing funky, very Memphis businesses that existed there. And they all kind of work together. And then ultimately, obviously, that all connects to the park and what is it now called? The Health Sciences Park.
Right.
Yeah.
So just a couple of thoughts on that. I think when we think about our public spaces, two things. One is on the streets and the streetscape work. What our board, what the leaders of the institutions told us is they said, we want to see the speed of the traffic reduced. We want the streets to be safer for pedestrians and bicyclists. We want them to be more attractive, and we want to see more on-street parking. So what that meant for us is, we're overbuilt overall in the city on our lane capacity, like how wide our streets are. So we were able to work with the city to shrink the travel lanes, the vehicular travel lanes, to several of the major streets in the district, and open up areas for pedestrians, bicyclists, and then also add a significant amount of landscaping. We've added about 200 planters in the district over the past couple of years that are maintained by our ambassador program. And so I think that that's going to help, especially as people get out and about more, because I agree with you. I think that that the new public life is going to be an outdoor public life. I mean, we were seeing it already. I mean, in my neighborhood where I live now is, on a Friday night, it's people sitting in front yards across from each other. Everybody's moved outside. All of this social setting has become outside. And so I think that we saw that the streets now have been queued up to allow some of that a little bit more, because we've opened up the streets to be more than just vehicular streets. They're now open for other sources, but also open to things like parklets, like in front of Edge Alley and in front of High Cotton. There are several parklets. I think we're going to start to see more of those. A lot of cities are moving towards permit-free parklet construction and things like that, because frankly, in America, we've done a pretty terrible job of commingling commerce and public space. And I think that that's going to be required moving forward. We have to be smarter about how we have our goods and services, allow our small businesses to monetize the spaces in front of their stores, but also our parks, right? Like, why is it so terrible to be able to go and get a sandwich, a coffee, or a beer in one of our parks?
Right.
Why is that? It just seems like it's been so, and especially in today's setting. I mean, how do we design these places in such a way that in Memphis with 98-degree heat and 99% humidity, that they become comfortable? And I think that's something that we've been spending a lot of time the past couple of months thinking about. And you'll start to see some changes at Health Sciences Park recently. We installed a bunch of new signage, a bunch of new, some seating, new pavilions, new electrical, putting in the infrastructure to allow for things like fans and being able to, run coolers and things like that, so that you can begin to have more commercialized outdoor space. I think is going to be something that we're going to continue to experiment in the district, but I think you're going to see a lot more of that across the city.
Well, I can just say personally, I was down with a friend at the Fourth Bluff, and it was just a great way to be outside, to be socially distanced, to sit at the little public tables that are out there and eat some food and perhaps drink a glass of wine. I'm not sure if that's legal, so I'm not sure we did that. And you see other people. And it wasn't people we knew, and they were very far away, and everyone was apart. But just that sort of sense of getting out of solitary confinement was incredibly just rejuvenating. And I think, and that Fourth Bluff has some of that really lightly built infrastructure, right? It's got all the just casual tables all around. It's got the kind of string lighting around, and it just makes it this very inviting place to kind of sit around and watch the sunset. That, and back to Health Sciences Park. Just not to get all into it, but we're almost done with the statues and monuments, right? The base has not been moved, but it's all settled, right? It's just logistics at this point.
Right. That's my understanding as well. Of course, Memphis Green Space owns the park and has been running point on the management of the removal of the pedestal and the bodies and things of that nature.
Yeah.
But yes, that's our understanding as well, that should be wrapping up very soon.
But you're the steward. Are you all the steward of that park, or is Memphis Green Space the steward of Health Science?
So we have a relationship with Memphis Green Space, and that we're helping them take care of the park.
Got it. Okay.
And that's again both the lawn services and the tree trimming, but also the programming and activation. I mean, we had built up a pretty successful little series of events down at Health Sciences Park that were on Fridays, whether it was Zumba in the park or spin classes in the park, concerts in the park, and then combining that with food trucks and things like that. And we're getting really good crowds. And, we moved a lot of that stuff online when COVID hit. And David Qualls, I don't know if you know who this guy is. Do you know who he is?
No.
Like one of the most energetic, captivating figures that I've ever seen. He's got this huge Zumba following, and these people come out of nowhere to sign up for these online Zumba classes that he teaches now, that we've moved online, but hopefully we'll have him back in the park soon. So doing those types of events in the park, I think are all helpful to drive that energy. And I think it's going to be really important to get that stuff back soon as people feel safe. UT doesn't have students back in, so it'll be interesting to see how, as students start coming back to UT, add another level of energy back into the park as well.
I mean, do you have a sense of, again, some of that is loud in the phase we're in, I believe, right? I mean, some health clubs are open at reduced capacity. So you could ostensibly be doing some of that outside.
We're just being a little careful right now with it. And also I think because of the students not being there right now and some of the other things, but we'll be ramping that stuff up back in public.
Just two more areas I wanted to touch on. One is, one of the big goals for you all, I've heard you talk about, was creating more residential space, apartments. And so the apartments at Wonder Bread are about to open, if they haven't.
They're open. And
they are open now.
They're leasing up.
They're leasing up. Okay. Yeah. Are there other apartment projects on the horizon, or is that all kind of on pause with this pandemic?
So there were about 1,300 units that are in the pipeline, meaning someplace between pre-development and under construction in the district. The thing that has been interesting is, while there were a few projects that kind of had their hand over the pause button, we haven't really seen any of them hit pause or stop yet.
Yeah.
Which is good. I mean, and we're developing. We've got a small project that we're developers on or co-developers on of about 65 units, 70 units at the end of the day of scattered lot infill just north of Poplar Avenue around the just around Le Bonheur, basically.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Around that Le Bonheur associate lot. So that's kind of this scattered missing middle housing. And that project definitely, like, because the banks had their attention on PPP and all these other things, like, we certainly saw some of that slow down for a while. We just weren't able to make any progress on stuff, but it's all starting to come back through. And we have a real estate fund that we're going to launch. We're supposed to launch April 2nd, but again, that will be a non-recourse debt fund that we'll have at the district. That will be about a $30 million non-recourse debt fund for real estate development projects. But that won't, that's been delayed and that's been pushed off just because of bank capacity. But all these things that are happening, I think are going to are still moving forward. They just, we hit this collective, everybody kind of took a breath for a minute.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and that, Jennifer Oswald had similar things to say, that there weren't plugs being pulled really on projects, but slow down for all kinds of reasons, but not a sort of complete panic. Stop everything.
So yeah, cautiously optimistic that things will kind of keep chugging along.
The other thing before we wrap up, the medical district is a really diverse, doesn't even begin to capture it, but diverse socioeconomic place, right? I mean, there is public housing, there is new, more medium and higher income housing going in. You've got people who work in the district who make, I don't know how much money as surgeons, down to people, a tremendous amount of lower income, working class folks. So you've been trying to work, the district is also trying to work with residents in the area, particularly those who've been maybe hit economically. Talk about that.
Sure. So we have a program we call Hire Local, and the Hire Local program is about connecting the residents who live in the medical district and the job opportunities at the institutions. And, we had between 70 and 80 people that were in our portal that were part of this initial cohort of going through a really interesting sort of partnership that we were working with Southwest Tennessee Community College that was, would provide the skills for the jobs and then connect them into the interviews at the institutions. And of course, that was literally, those classes were supposed to start the middle of March. So, or late March, actually. So anyway, with that, we're in the process of shifting that stuff online, but, working with MIFA to provide stipends to those people that were in the portal so that they can make their rent payment, pay their utility bill and things like that, I think has been, a helpful tool. But then the other thing is that even for the residents that aren't in the Hire Local program, there's 8 different neighborhoods that make up the medical district. And they're all, like you said, very, very different. We have a group that gets together, it's called the Focus Roundtable, and they get together about every other month or so over dinner. And it's the neighborhood leaders from those 8 different groups. And they sit down and the deal is we'll buy dinner and they set the agenda and we just eat and talk about what's going on in the district and what they're seeing in the neighborhoods. And it's really 2 purposes. One is to draw those connections across neighborhoods so that they can collaborate on different projects in different ways, but also so that we can understand what's happening at the sort of the grass top and grassroots level in the neighborhoods and figure out how we can tailor our programs and things to best meet the needs of the residents. And what we've seen is that some of the neighborhoods, they just are like, well, we don't have any PPE. People that live here don't, they live in paycheck to paycheck. They don't have abundance of hand sanitizers and we're getting these, requests of I need $50 for this, that, or the other to, these fixed costs that because hours have been cut or, whatever the case may be. And so we at the same time that we were working with the businesses, we also doubled the amount of money we spend with, or we commit to neighborhood groups for neighborhood grants. And some of these neighborhood groups are proposing things like, PPE pantries for the neighborhood. They're proposing things like, a rental assistance program for some of the residents in the neighborhood. We're not direct service providers, and so we don't really have the infrastructure to be able to do that. But if we can support those neighborhood groups and let them do that, then we do that to the extent possible. So,
Yeah.
I think you try to help the residents and the ones that are working through the higher local program. Try to work with the small businesses. Working and focusing on public spaces, and then also trying to work in keeping the real estate development projects going, I think has been really our focus during the past few months.
Okay. All right. I think we will leave it there. Tommy, thanks for coming on. Thanks for everything you're doing. I really
Thank you,
appreciate
Eric.
it.
Appreciate you having me.
Yeah, absolutely. If you are listening to this week on Behind the Headlines, Dr. John McCullers from UT Health Sciences and LeBonner, an epidemiologist, talking about some of these issues of reopening and all the. We'll get an expert rather than Tommy and I speculating on COVID treatments and spread and so on. We're going to talk to Dr. McCullers. And be sure to subscribe to the Daily Memphian on the site. Follow me on Twitter at Eric Barnes2. Subscribe to this weekly podcast on iTunes, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts, or you can get them on the Daily Memphian site. Thank you. Thanks for joining us.